Hi, it's Mike Stevenson here. Today we're going to talk about Azure Integration Services, and we're going to focus on the question of where do I use which technology. So, quick few points about me. So, I'm Mike Stevenson, based in the UK in Newcastle. My blog address is on the screen here. I'm a freelance cloud architect. I've worked with Azure for many years. I've been Microsoft MVP for 14 years. And I also am a product advisor for Serverless 360, which is an enterprise cloud monitoring solution for Microsoft Azure. So, to give a bit of background for the project I'm going to reference in this slide deck, so I've been working with customers doing big enterprise scale integration projects with Microsoft Azure technology. So, the customer that I'm going to sort of loosely base the content of this presentation on is doing multi-year investments in Microsoft iPaaS. They also use Microsoft Data Platform. They do integration with SAP, Power Platform, Workday, IBM, Maximo, and a whole bunch of other systems. We have many test environments in addition to production. We've got in the range of 2,000 logic apps. We've got loads of function apps, loads of integration accounts, API management, and Service Bus, and all of the other things that make up the Microsoft Azure Integration Services. So when I see customers looking at Azure Integration Services, particularly if they don't come from an integration background or they think they don't come from an integration background, a couple of questions that usually pop up is what is Azure Integration Services and why should I care? And then the architecture question of where do I use which technology? And those are the kind of things that we're going to talk about today. So before I jump in, I want to kind of just make us think back to historically integration solutions built with Microsoft technology. So we really had three areas that people have usually come from. So you may have come from a BizTalk background, you may have come from a SQL Server integration services background, or you may have come from a custom development background. They were the three main types of integration developments with Microsoft technology. So if you came from a BizTalk background, you had challenges that the learning curve was really difficult, and you needed this very specific skill set based around understanding the foundation of BizTalk, things like the message box, its publish subscribe architecture, correlations, and a number of other concepts, which made BizTalk a very powerful product. You could do some really good solutions with it, but it also made it very challenging for some companies. Excuse me, I've had a fly has touched my big touchscreen monitor there. Let's see if we can get that back. You can see the little red crosses down here where some little insects just joined the presentation. So I think we were just talking about the foundation of BizTalk. So you could build these great solutions, but it meant that it was difficult for customers if you didn't have these experience skill sets and you didn't understand how BizTalk worked to really use it in the best way. So it became complicated to implement BizTalk. SQL Server Integration Services, on the other hand, was much more about data migration. BizTalk was about enterprise application integration. It was about messaging and that kind of thing. SSIS was about shifting data between different data sources to things like databases, batches, and that kind of things. Again, SSIS was quite a specific skill set. The thing BizTalk and SSIS had in common was they were both trying to provide capability around a visual designer for building your solutions. SSIS had a more DBA focused skill set though, so it meant because it was part of the SQL ecosystem, it was very common that companies would have SSIS. So the third one was really custom development. So this is based around either .NET code or script-based solutions. Maybe you built APIs, maybe you built WCF components. And historically, these were a really common way customers would implement integration solutions just with custom code, not necessarily leveraging a platform like SSIS or BizTalk. Maybe it was just like a console app or a web service in IIS or something like that. So interestingly, I think back when we had big BizTalk implementations, doing sales for BizTalk, the biggest competitor for BizTalk was usually custom development. Okay, so if we think about the trends of integrations, this slide's a slide I did integrate a number of years ago, which you'll be able to tell from the timeline on the graph on the left. And what this slide was about back, probably what 5, 6, 7 years ago, something like that now, is there was all these different sort of integration themes that were being talked about at the time. And I think back when we did this, I'm guessing microservices was the one that was starting to become a buzzword. And people were building wanting solutions that could help them build simpler integration solutions by leveraging those particular sort of themes and paradigms in integration. The slightly further back, we had ESB and SOA were the sort of big things people were talking about, and then going further back again, we had the more traditional approaches like ETL, mainframes, batch integration, that kind of thing that had been around for a lot longer. Now, the key thing when we think about an integration platform today, and this is still true just as much as it was when I first used this slide a few years back, is all of these integration approaches here are still kind of used today, still relevant. You may have a customer project where they're doing microservices type integrations, but they're also doing ESB patterns, they're doing EDI integration. So none of these historical things have ever gone away. We have all these new things. I guess the argument of the diagram on the left is back in 2016, 17, whatever it was, we were kind of on this bit here. I think we've kind of gone down here, and really, I think where we are with Microsoft Azure integration today is we're kind of past that, all the kind of buzzwords, and we're really just starting to see customers actually use iPaaS and actually really focus on delivering good solutions. And it's kind of more just getting on with it and getting stuff done rather than it is worried about which buzzwords we use. I think that's a really great place to be from a Microsoft integration perspective, getting things done and delivering value for customers. So if we think about the Microsoft Azure Integration Services platform, I like to use this diagram quite often because it talks about all these Azure features. Where do they fit in terms of the capabilities that you need? So the great thing here is that we've got a lot of the common integration stuff. So EAI over here, we've got logic apps, we've got data transform stuff here, durable messaging. If you saw my BizTalk webinars I did a few months ago, you would see we had a comparison between BizTalk and AIS, talking about how these things kind of changed over time. In AIS, we're leveraging all of the assets that Azure has and putting them together to build solutions. So Azure has lots of really great stuff in this space over here about management and monitoring. And we've got things that we just didn't have in BizTalk world, like the ability to use functions for lightweight components like business rules and data transformations and that kind of thing. Now, when it comes to the SSIS compete, so moving into the Azure integration space, we're really looking at these technologies over here where we've got Data Factory and Synapse pipelines are often used by customers instead of SSIS. When you're in the Azure Integration Services world, it really kind of depends sort of what areas that you're working in and what types of solution you're trying to build. And then we've got these new Power Platform-based technologies, which is the reason I have these on the graph down here, on the chart, is firstly for Power Automate, when we have these human workflow type solutions, Power Automate provides the ability either natively with Power Automate or by leveraging Power Apps to integrate with a user, which was always something really difficult for system to system integration to kind of do. But what we find is now we can do things like join Power Automate and Logic Apps to create those scenarios where you want to link a system workflow and a human workflow together. So maybe an approval process is a good example. I think I've got this little mosquito back on my screen there, little midgy thing, if you notice. Okay, so I guess the one last thing on this slide is just when it comes to custom integrations. So customers are still going to build custom integrations, that equivalent of the .NET code, and you do still have. So if we think BizTalk is more closely aligned with things like Logic Apps, SSIS, with things like functions, with pipelines over there, but then custom code that you traditionally might have wrote in a console app, you might be looking at something like an Azure function now would be the kind of equivalent. You've got this hosting platform to run your custom code on. But the great thing I think where Azure Integration Services comes into play is if you want to have some custom code with a graphical workflow on the top, you don't need that huge BizTalk implementation overhead of having to set up clustered SQLs and SSO services and all this other stuff. You can just build some code in a function, orchestrate the function with a logic app, and then you've got the best of both worlds. So I think we can get some real good new things that you couldn't do with the older technologies. Okay, so if we think about usage scenarios now, so I think this is quite a good slide, which I hope makes people think about this in ways they haven't before. So if we think about, we've got the BizTalk migration customers over here, so they're using things like Logic Apps, Functions, API Management, and a lot of the stuff that we looked on the other slide. We've then got SSIS migrations coming to the cloud who are using pipelines, whether it be in Data Factory or Synapse. We also have custom development. So again, custom development, it's really realistic. You might be doing things like functions, API management, service buses, logic apps. And the thing you start noticing at this point is that actually these use cases are starting to use the same components. So it's not unrealistic for a custom developed solution to be using a function. Likewise, a BizTalk migration solution, they probably are using logic apps. And then we start having other things coming into play. So maybe your IT admins over here, they might be using logic apps to do some automation of their IT admin tasks. You might have some of your business users or IT users might be doing self-service automation with Power Automate. The chances are if you've got Power Platform and Dynamics, you're definitely going to be using Power Automate there, but it's really common to see Power Platform implementations also using functions, API, Service Bus, especially when they get to the, past the little sort of system of engagement app and they get to those enterprise implementations on the Dynamics/Power Platform ecosystem. That they're using a lot of Azure assets to help them. We then have just custom development rather than custom developed integration, but you're just building an app. I had one where it was a LAMP stack application. They were using logic apps for scheduling. They might be using API management. And these are kind of things outside of the typical .NET ecosystem. You're still having developers are using these kind of Azure assets. So, maybe you've got your developers are writing node functions or something like that, but they're still on that functions runtime, still in that function app experience. Now, the key thing I want to get across here is we start seeing these same types of Azure resources light up in all of these different scenarios. And what that means is that if you're building an integration team, the past, in the history, we had BizTalk and we'd have challenges that it was very difficult to cross-train somebody from another team to come and work with BizTalk. The learning curve was really huge and there were so many challenges for that person to get up to speed. Whereas now it's really realistic. If we're doing an integration platform, you can borrow people from, for example, you could borrow people from your Power App team, from your custom dev team. They probably would know some of the skill sets already. Maybe they're already aware of API management and they can help you with your BizTalk migration or something like that. And for a customer, that ability to use a sort of matrix style use of your developers where you'd have people in certain teams, but then based on project demands, you can move people from one team to another because they've got a lot of these common skill sets. And I think to me, that's the single biggest win on Azure Integration Services is that ability to democratize the skill set requirements, to have people from other teams helping build integration solutions. That lowers the cost of ownership, removes those sort of, or reduces the amount of highly experienced, highly skilled people you need who just know about integration, and it kind of makes it easier to scale their team out. So while all that I've just said is great, there are still challenges. They're just different to what we've had in the past. So the biggest one being customers used to have BizTalk as an integration product. Now you've got Azure as an integration platform. So that takes a lot of work to explain the differences to customers and to help them understand what that really means. So now you've got this sort of set of Lego bricks that you can use. There's many more bricks. You know, in BizTalk there was a handful of different things you could use. Now you've probably got nearly 100 different Azure resources, but they all, as a toolkit, they all do different jobs. So it's about understanding which ones are the right ones to use, given your requirement. But I think there's also an element of knowing or having some standardization. So you should try to reduce the amount of using technologies just because it would be fun. Try and use the same tools to solve the same patterns where you can and where it makes sense, and that'll lower your cost of ownership. And the other big challenge is, instead of learning one or two really difficult skills, there's now lots of skills to learn. So we looked at the diagram before. You need to understand all those different areas, but they're much easier skills to learn. So it's really feasible. Somebody can go from zero to hero in a very short period of time with each of those different types of skill set you're needing. So in the presentation, this has been recorded for YouTube, so my plan's to do this introductory session for about 20 minutes maybe, and then I'm going to add it to a playlist where there'll be videos about each of these different kind of things here on the screen, and we'll do a bit more of a deep dive on each one of them. So just to paint these now, these are some of the ones we're going to cover. We're going to look at a couple of example kind of architecture journeys, and then in the follow-up videos, I'll deep dive into each of these individually. So although we're saying that the technologies can be this or that, or this versus that, to me, where the real big win is about combining technologies. So to me, that's the secret sauce to being successful. So instead of logic apps versus BizTalk, really it's in your integration platform, it should be logic apps plus Power Automate. When do you use one? When do you use the other? Logic apps plus Data Factory, and just understanding the pros, the cons, the differences. There are some overlaps, so there might be cases where you could use both, and it would be picking the right one for you based on skill sets, what you've done on other projects, and that kind of thing. But there are distinct differences as well, and sort of understanding those will help you combine the tech together to build the right solutions. So what I want to show is a journey that we went through to help evolve our sort of very, I guess in some ways, kind of quite siloed integrations that we started building to begin with, and how we've now got a much more sort of extendable integration platform. And I think this will help customers see where you can get to that really empowers your integration platform. So when we started, we built a lot of logic apps that would look a bit like this one here. So we'd have, in this case, we've got Maximo triggers a logic app. We do, some validation here. We get the data from SAP. We do a bunch of stuff, create a record in SAP, create another record, and then return a response back to Maximo. And we had, this is just one integration scenario. We had other integrations with other systems that looked very similar to this. The key things to really note here is, number one, the logic app gets quite complicated quite quickly. So often what starts, when you first get the requirements, it might sound not that complicated a solution. And then very quickly you'll realize, oh, well, we've also got to do this, then we've got to do that. And suddenly you can get a really big workflow, and that becomes challenging. But the other thing is, as well, is this logic app's almost like a broker between those two applications for this one use case, which in this case was an order update up here. If you had requirements later where you want to do more with an order, it becomes really difficult to do these other things with it, because the coupling this logic app has to the two systems at either end. So What we wanted to do was start opening this up a bit to allow us to build other stuff without having to replicate these over and over again. So instead of having one logic app that's complicated becomes two that are complicated, three, we can start making more smaller ones, and it will give us more flexibility, and that would lead to us being able to do agile integration. So as we scaled it up, you can see here that this is the thing I was on about. We end up with, these complicated logic apps. There's more of them, and it just slows you down. Every time you've got to change stuff, it becomes challenging. Every project kind of becomes rebuild and repeat rather than reuse and extend. When we reuse and extend, I think we get return on that investment. When we rebuild and repeat, we're kind of not reinventing the wheel, but it's not far from that. We're having to build lots of the similar logic apps over and over again because we can't just take the thing we did before and extend it. On the platform, this just starts getting complicated, and if we can break things up, it becomes easier, I think. So one of the things we started to do, this is an example interface project. We've got a plant up in the corner there. It sends data to the Event Hub, and there's many different types of data. So one of the things that we did was we built a function app that reads this Event Hub, and it publishes data to a Service Bus topic over here. And the Event Hub was really driven by the systems in the plant needed an Event Hub to push data out to, and that was really kind of like what those systems could support. We can read many times off the Event Hub, but there's a number of complexities that would have brought into what we were going to do later. So what we plan to do was build this receiver function that would just basically like shovel messages from Event Hub onto Service Bus, and then it would promote certain properties to allow us to pub sub. So if you think on Service Bus, we can route by context properties or the label or something like that. So we could promote certain properties and do publish subscribe. This then let us bring in, as projects wanted to use this data from the plant, we could build interfaces that would drive off Service Bus. So here you can see where we would start building these interfaces. And one of the things that we did was, if you imagine the plant spitting out, 20 plus different types of data, all hitting that same Event Hub, we push onto Service Bus, and one of the types of message was about a rail car getting loaded in the plant. So the rail car comes into the plant, gets filled up, starts leaving the plant, and we get a notification to say the rail car's been loaded. So one of the interfaces that we built was with a logic app. So just here, and that would pick up loaded railcar messages. We built a conversion API that's had API management sitting in front of it. So these are reusable operations for weight conversions, product conversions, that kind of thing. So this logic app's able to take the raw message from the plant, do the conversions, create a canonical message, and then publish it back to a different Service Bus topic here. Just here, and that would then support other interfaces that we might want to build. Now, some of the interfaces that we started building, were logic app based. So over here, we've got this logic app, subscribes to the loaded railcar message and goes and registers it in Dataverse. So we were going to be planning to build a CRM kind of application, and then a portal which would allow users to self-service when they wanted to buy a rail car that was filled in the plant. So having that data in the Dataverse meant we could build those applications on top of Dataverse and create systems of engagement for our salespeople and customer self-service. Now, the great thing about, when we think about the different technology choices here, Function app over here was really great on the left for reading high volume of messages from the Event Hub. We might have hundreds of thousands of messages coming out a day from the plant. The rail car ones, that you actually have to physically have a rail car get loaded, so we may only have 10 or 20 a day that would come off Service Bus as a loaded rail car. And then when we fire into Dataverse. Using the Logic app up here means we can take advantage of all of those connectors that come for Dataverse. So instead of having to write all the code to do the integration, we can leverage the Logic app connectors. So best of both worlds kind of thing there. So next up, we had an interface that listens for the same topic, listens for messages to go to SAP. So here we've got a Logic app, and it was able to integrate with SAP. And in Logic apps, we've got a number of options. So we could use the SAP connectors for Logic apps if we wanted to call iDocs or ABAPs or BAPIs or something like that. We also could potentially have had API management here if we wanted to call APIs that were exposed from SAP. Logic apps gives us a number of choices. We could have called HTTP Direct, but we probably want to centralize those APIs. And then the third interface over here is going to our transport system, which actually was using a different, like an older approach. So it was using SFTP, and it wanted flat files delivered in various different formats. So again, bread and butter for Logic apps. We can use the integration account to convert to a flat file. We can deliver with an SFTP connector. And I think it gives a good example of the different kinds of integration here. So we had out-of-the-box connectors for Dataverse, we've got connectors or APIs for SAP, and we've got flat file SFTP, and Logic Apps is handling all of that stuff correctly and using out-of-the-box features. Now, one of the things we did do, in addition to these auto sort of filled rail cars, is we then had the challenge of selling rail cars that weren't produced in the plant. So we'd actually buy a rail car from a third party, or there was a couple of other scenarios as well. So we needed a way to get data into the system. However, it doesn't come from the plant. So we could have built this in a number of different ways, but one of the easiest ways to do this was to allow a business super user could use a spreadsheet in Teams. We could have a Power Automate over here that when they clicked a flow button, that would go and read the spreadsheet, write to the Event Hub, and then we reuse all of the interfaces that we've already built to register that rail car with all the systems that need to know about it, so that we can then start processing that rail car. So this is really where the Power Platform offers that system of engagement through the Power Automate, can integrate with a human in a human workflow type scenario, triggered by a flow button. Power Automate's getting the spreadsheet from Excel, and it's just, again, all out of the box features here. So that crosses from the kind of the user interaction into the system, behind the scenes system workflow. Now, next up, we're using this data off Service Bus to do a lot of stuff now. So we've got this one message that we built coming through. We've actually delivered value for multiple different interfaces at this point, and we've reused it from the start as well. And we're just extending. The big thing I like to encourage is the use of Service Bus as an extensibility point, so that you can plug and play different interfaces as the business creates new requirements. Now, one of the things that we did was we also were building a Synapse data platform, and we could take messages from Service Bus. We built a function app that could get data into the data platform. And actually, this scenario here is really just the loaded railcar message, but we could actually get all of the different data from Service Bus, from different interfaces, into data platform via a single function app. And that would trigger pipelines. And we could have Power Apps, Power BI. We could write APIs for different systems to query that data. And we just start building a data platform to hold the data in a data warehousing type scenario that can service different use cases where they need to see aggregations of the data. So again, we're getting more value based on this architecture we've been evolving over the period of a project. Okay, so step 4 was after we added Synapse. This is how this started working. So we had different systems coming in through the integration platform, through the Event Hub, through those, and we had this was the function app over here. And then we start having Event Hub has its capture feature, which can write data to the data lake Gen 2 storage. So with Event Hub, we've got the capture feature, and it's out of the box writing these files. And then we can have Synapse pipelines that can process data from the data lake. We can start querying data. We can trigger Spark jobs from the pipelines to process the data. So we can either do this on a scheduled basis, or we can do it triggered by an event for the file getting written to the storage account. There's a number of really cool things, but that's how we start leveraging data going into the data platform to trigger different integrations. So the bit on the previous slide is really this bit here. This is this transactional data coming into the data platform via event hubs. Now, what we can also do, we've got various systems down here where we can build pipelines with Synapse to bulk import data. So we could, go and get however many times a day we go to these systems, bulk import various data sets. These all end up in our data lake here, and then that triggers pipelines which will use Spark jobs, process the data, and then we create data sets that Synapse can query. So we can execute these queries from Power Apps, from Power BI. We can do, if you've got data scientists, you might be doing experimentation in Power BI or even in Spark, depending on the skills of your data sets, to explore what they can learn about the data that you process. And this is how we leverage all the transactional data in our integration platform, all the line of business data from our bulk imports, and we can start building things for the users to engage with in Power Apps and Power BI. Now, all of that we've built up so far means we've now got our data here, and because we've got this centralized data repository cross-application, in addition to reactive interfaces and messaging-based interfaces that we looked at a couple of slides ago, we can also start building interfaces that drive from the data in our data platform. So one example would be we can have Synapse pipelines process the data, and they can trigger out to Service Bus or an event grid or something like that, and an event for something happening. So maybe they decide, we've got 10 users that have been created today or something similar. That can be used to trigger integrations such as a logic app from Service Bus to go and do something. The next thing we can do is a pipeline potentially could spit out a new data set here, say in this case is a CSV file, which could go into storage, could trigger a logic app that goes and delivers it to an end system. Or finally, we might, I think this is one of the ones people don't really realize as much, as if you've got something like Synapse, you can use logic apps with a SQL connector, and you can go and query data. So maybe you've got a table in your data warehouse that has all of your products or something, and you could have a logic app goes and gets those products and synchronizes it to another system. So you can build these different types of interfaces on top of that centralized data. Thinking back to our capabilities and requirements for integration right at the start of the presentation. So the thing that we noticed is, although we've got new types of integration, we've still got all of these different patterns we need. So we need data, we need workflows, APIs, events, messaging, batch. There's others as well. These are the capabilities that your integration platform requires. And hopefully the last few slides have shown how the combination of an AIS, Azure Integration Services, and a Microsoft-based data platform can help you deliver on all of this stuff. So regardless of what the integration requirements that you have are, there'll be something in Azure that you can use to start helping you implement that. That's the key message here, regardless of whether it's old school or new school integration. So really this gets us to the point where we now say, right, this is all great. We've got the elevator pitch, we've got the digging through the journey, but we've got these technical choices to make. Where do we use what? So in the next videos, we're going to take a short video that'll cover each of these different scenarios, and we'll look at Logic Apps versus Power Automate, Logic Apps versus Data Factory, etc., etc. My aim is to get maybe 10 minutes on each of them, just helping people understand some of those differences. And then hopefully, if people want to, they can. There's that people would feel it useful that we add to the playlist. Thank you for listening today, and hope you found the video useful. And look forward to seeing the next video.